My name is Itachi Uchiha, and today we will read together Gateway of the Mind. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any sense or way to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that 5 senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all of his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test retained full muscular function, he could no longer hear, see, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate even with or without any sense to the outside world, he was alone with his own thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, intelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to this man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking to him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have ever known. At this point, a sizable portion of the scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased, through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying that voices were overwhelming in every waking moment. His consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against a wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so that he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establish contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer hear or form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to the table so that he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to his constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. he whispered. I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us. And his vital signs stopped. Whether there was no apparent cause of death. A follow-up study, 2000, Dr. G.F., Department of Neurology, Hospital name withheld, San Francisco, CA, recent study of a degenerative disease which targets the motor functions and the cognitive decline often lead to hallucinations of the deceased. The death of the targeted cells and the chemicals in the brain by the disease leads to a loss of smell. Among other senses, the cause of the disease is unknown. Hallucinations present in 39.8% of the patients falling into the three categories. A sensation of presence, a sideways passage, or illusions. Present in 25.5% of patients. Formed visual hallucinations present in 22.2%, and auditory hallucinations present in 9.7%. Continuing study in San Francisco, California, 2000 year, 2003, until the present. Well. This was certainly one very interesting creepypasta to read. I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed it, since I have enjoyed it as well. It was a very nice take on the mind on its own, and also contact with the other world. Thank you all for listening, and please do make sure to stay safe out there. Thank you all for watching and listening, and stay safe out there. Goodbye.